can see this, okay? All right, so a good night's sleep. As Rhonda mentioned, I have a book out through Alcoa too, actually a couple books, and one of which is called A Good Night's Sleep. You may have actually heard us before, and we want to make sure that you're aware of this because it's a great resource through Alcoa. But we also have some articles that I want to make sure you're aware of, and we have made these as available as PDFs. And Rhonda has these, and she will get people the links so that you have this information as well. In other words, we have a lot of information that you can then share with your clientele, with your membership there as well. Just to know, we have lots of information here. Well, we're in times of great stress, and I tell you that because my background is as a health psychologist with a specialty or expertise in stress management from a mind, body, spirit perspective. And we are in times of great stress. And you're going to see the connection between stress and sleep in a moment here. I'll make this abundantly clear. But I want to say something else first. There's a wonderful expression that says, you cannot pour from an empty cup. We see this a lot with healthcare workers, with nurses. I think we probably have some nurses in the audience here. But I want to tell you that by not getting enough sleep, you've got a leak in your cup. And even if you think you're filling it, you're going to be drained. So this whole presentation really is about how to ensure that we can keep the cup filled. But we got a little problem, and that problem is called the coronavirus. So when Rhonda first asked me to take part in this presentation, this was not on the horizon, I don't believe, but it sure is now. And so just to kind of tell you that this is one reason why people are not sleeping. And here's some things we see in terms of this. A sense of uncertainty, disruption, fragility, being overwhelmed, unease, and you may have heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the trauma that's going to end up being part of the PTSD down the road. But right now, we want to see what we can do in terms of treating this and or dealing with this. And lack of sleep is contributing to this as well, just FYI. But if I say nothing else, I want to have you understand that so much of not getting a good night's sleep deals with a compromised immune system. So here are the three things we talk about in terms of a poor immune system: poor sleep, chronic stress, and poor nutrition. And I got to tell you, this sounds like everybody I know, especially now with the pandemic going on. So the ways in which we want to try and deal with this as best we can is to get better quality sleep, to get some sense of peace and feel like we have a sense of empowerment with all that's going on with things we can't control, and healthy eating. Now, I heard the previous keynote speaker do a wonderful job about mind frame and perceptions and things, which is a huge part of stress as well. But let's continue. So you've heard the expression, I slept like a baby. Well, I think we all know that not all babies sleep well all the time, but this is the goal we want to have. And my question to you is, how is your wellness literacy? Because so many people don't include a good night's sleep in their wellness programming. And this, I think, is really a shame because we spend a third of our lives sleeping. But this is what people think wellness is, basically broccoli and aerobics. I want you to think beyond the box here because it's not. And okay, let me give you a 21st century update. It is not just kale and CrossFit. It's so much more than this. So if this is what wellness tends to be thought of in terms of wellness programming, I want you to think outside the box, and sleeping is a part of this. Thinking outside the box actually is to take a look at wellness in the bigger perspective. If you talk to the shamans, the sages, the wisdom keepers, and the healers of all times, all cultures, all languages, this is what you're going to hear them say. The whole is always greater than the sum of the parts. And if you ask these sage shamans and wisdom keepers and wellness experts today, what are the parts of the whole? This is what you're going to hear them say: mind, body, spirit, emotions. And we now know that sleep affects all of these. It's not just for your physical health. Again, I'm probably telling you things which you already know, but I think it's good to review this. So in this case here, I have one question for you. Actually, I'm going to have several questions for you, but the first question is, what is your connection with nature? And the reason why I ask that is that the sleep cycle is part of the natural world. And we are so disconnected from the natural world in terms of artificial lighting, in terms of our addiction to cell phones and smartphones, that we need to actually connect to the natural world. And you'll see as I get through this talk here why I'm saying this. because most people don't live a sustainable life. Most people are burning the candle at both ends. They're not getting the required amount of sleep. And as a consequence, it's affecting their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, and their spiritual health, all these things. So my question to you is, are you living a sustainable life? Now, I made this slide before the pandemic, and I think a lot of people have had to change. I've heard the word pivot a lot in terms of lifestyle structures and patterns and behaviors and things, but I still see this as being a part of a question we need to ask ourselves. So somehow I lost control here. Hang on a sec. Hang on. Well, I have an unsustainable computer right now. Hang on just a second. Wave me if you can hear me. Okay, that's a good sign. Well, I tell you what, let's go to plan B here. I'm just going to talk with the slides. Well, it looks like we'll be stuck on the screen here for someone who's unstable for quite some time, but let me see if I can continue on, because this is not the only slide I have. So the next picture, just I'll tell you what it was, and you'll see this in the PDF, is a picture of a city at nighttime. And it turns out that we are living in a, I think we're questioning our motives right now in terms of, hey, sweetie, can you give me a favor? Can you get me the cord to this? It's right there. I gotta plug it in. I wonder if I'm low on batteries here, because right now I can't do my slides. So we have actually too much light pollution going on, and as a consequence, it's affecting our sleep. And with regard to this, it's affecting all kinds of things here. So I want to talk about circadian rhythms. Thanks. Can you find me a way to plug that in? And circadian rhythms are your natural body rhythms. And the natural body rhythms are basically based on a 24-hour clock. And with regards to this, it's your eat cycle, it's your sleep cycle, it's your even going to bathroom cycle. And what we now know is that our sleep cycles are thrown off if we're being involved with artificial light. And a lot of people are. And so what we have is basically poor circadian rhythms. I want you to be aware of this. And actually, if you get a chance, Google the term circadian rhythms, because as a consequence of our health, we need to know about this. It's not something that you see in the National Enquirer. Circadian rhythms is a scientific examination of the 24-hour clock that we have in our body that is part of the natural world. That's one reason why I asked that question. How is your relationship with the natural world? Because we are about to change the clocks in a few weeks, and that's going to throw off everyone's circadian rhythms. I'm sure you're well aware of this. Well, you're going to see a slide coming up that hopefully that you'll get a chance to take a look at this. There is a study put out every year by, I've got too much glare here. Let me see if I can change this here. There's a study put out every year by the American Psychological Association. And this study is called Stress in America. And they put this out every year. This year has been so stressful, they have 3 versions of it, 3 updates. And I want you to be aware of this because stress plays such a huge role in not being able to get a good night's sleep. Also, I want you to be aware in terms of the populations that you work with. There was a story on NPR a couple of days ago about interviewing people of color, and specifically Black women responded to this survey they did. And the word they used in terms of their description of their stress was exhausted. They said, I just feel exhausted. And this is the word that we're hearing time and time again from a number of people, but specifically women in the Black community. And I want you to be aware of that word. I want you to be aware of that concept, and that poor sleep is contributing to this feeling of being exhausted. So how is your sleep wellness? I want you to ask yourself that question. How is your sleep wellness? Because this is certainly a part of overall wellness that gets ignored on a regular basis. By the way, you'll see I have a slide here with Betty White, the actress, and she says this. She says, there's not a whole lot of humor in this presentation. That's why I'm going to grab it where I can. But she says, remember, get 8 hours of beauty sleep. Then she pauses and she says, 9 if you're ugly. Okay, insert laugh now. So we spend a third of our lives sleeping, and for some odd reason, this is not getting included in people's wellness programs. They're all into broccoli and aerobics, kale and CrossFit, but as a consequence of this, we're neglecting a huge part of our life. We spend a third of our lives doing this activity. There is an important reason why we are doing this, and is an important reason we need to pay attention as part of our wellness programming. So the purpose of sleep. Why do we sleep? I got to tell you that this has only been studied for about 50 years in earnest. And up until 3 or 4 years ago, they didn't have a good answer. They basically said the reason why you sleep is because you need to restore your body's physiology. You need to restore your thought process. Some people said you need to dream, you need to have REM, rapid eye movement. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago that a female scientist took a look at what goes on in your brain as a consequence of I just realized that I got my slides back now. Somehow, Rhonda, that was part of the screen sharing thing. Okay, so what she found out was that you have cells in your brain that, when you sleep, act like vacuum cleaners, and they suck up all of the waste products that your brain makes in the course of a day. These waste products are called amyloid tissue, or amyloid waste products. If you end up on Jeopardy, that's the answer, okay? So it turns out that when you sleep, these cells are called glial cells, Glial, glial cells. They had no idea what these were used for whatsoever until, again, some woman said, well, maybe they do something at nighttime when you're asleep. And sure enough, they do. So the purpose of sleep, we now know, is manyfold. There's lots of reasons why you sleep. But one reason why is to basically get rid of the amyloid tissue that your brain, the waste products that your brain makes. And what we now know is that if you don't get rid of those, you're more susceptible to Alzheimer's. It's going to really impede brain function, memory, reaction time, all of those things. And we're now seeing people come down with Alzheimer's. It used to be like, in the 70s, 80s. Now we're seeing people come down with it in their 40s and 50s. And I got to tell you, I just turned 64. This is something to be concerned about. I'm thinking, like, for everybody. I'm like, I pay more attention to this now as my age goes on. Okay, so when people talk about physiology of sleep, I want you to be aware of this. There are two hormones that come into play with the physiology of sleep. One of which I'm sure you've heard before, maybe both. The first one's called melatonin. That is a sleep hormone. The second hormone is serotonin. Serotonin is the happy hormone. You may have heard of people who take SSRI, serotonin inhibitor uptakes, so that basically you can balance your brain chemistry. We now know that when serotonin increases, melatonin decreases. The two kind of go in progression like this. So as a consequence, if you are doing things to boost your serotonin levels, you're going to minimize your melatonin. If you minimize your melatonin levels, you are not going to get a good night's sleep as you approach the nighttime hours. So just be aware of that. Now, what are some factors that affect serotonin? The food you eat, carbohydrates will boost serotonin levels. Medications, as I mentioned, will have an effect on serotonin levels. Light definitely increases serotonin levels. Again, light plays a big factor with sleep, and then there's other factors too. What decreases melatonin levels? I'm glad you asked. The first thing that it does is light. Light will decrease melatonin levels, so that when you wake up in the morning and the sun's out, your melatonin, basically, your pineal gland basically stops making it. Medications can also affect it. Food definitely can do it, as I mentioned, with carbohydrates. And as Rhonda mentioned earlier, I will tell you right now, cell phone use definitely affects melatonin. The light from your screen devices affects that. So how is your sleep wellness? This is a question I want you to ask yourself. I want you to ask your participants in your wellness programs across the state of Michigan, because, again, this is the neglected component that really is taking a huge detriment to our health and well-being. So let me just read some stats to you. Over 50% of Americans are considered to be sleep deprived. That's half of America. Secondly, 1/3 of Americans claim to have chronic insomnia. We'll talk about what that means in a second. Over 50% of all insomnia is stress related. Hopefully you can connect the dots here. So what I want you to be aware of is what we can do to decrease stress and increase quality of sleep. Now, I went to a lot of presentations on insomnia before I ever wrote this book. And one thing I heard one person say, an expert in this, which I thought was amazing, he said, insomnia is a learned behavior. I'll say it again. Insomnia is a learned behavior. And what we mean by this is that people actually adopt behaviors like cell phone use late at night or watching television late at night, what the case might be there, that impedes the time period that we need to be sleeping. So what we want to try and do is unlearn negative behaviors, relearn some positive behaviors, and get a good night's sleep. But we now know that poor sleep is affected with a number of health issues. I just want to read off a couple to you. So when you see these slides in this PDF, which I apologize you're not seeing now, but we're going to go with the flow here. Cancer is related to insomnia. Heart disease is related to insomnia. Diabetes, obesity, inflammation. Big headline news there. All the autoimmune diseases are somehow affected to insomnia, and depression. That sounds like the top 10 list of issues we see on a daily basis in the health news here. So in terms of this, sleep affects your overall physical health. There's no doubt about it. It's amazing that we take it for granted until obviously we're not sleeping well. There's a concept I want to share with you called sleep debt. Sleep debt basically says, if you're not getting your 8 hours of sleep a night, then you're deficient, but you can't make it up the next night. It's just not going to happen. That's what they show. I also want to share with you a concept called sleep deprivation. And sleep deprivation is when obviously you're denying yourself amount of sleep, but this is something which we use for torture. I don't know if you've been following the news at Guantanamo down in Cuba, but sleep deprivation is a form of torture, which is against the UN rules. But FYI, my question to you is, are you torturing yourself by not getting enough sleep? And the answer for a lot of people is yes. So we need to begin to change that mentality too. And again, emotional stress takes plays a huge role in not getting enough sleep. It's a term I want you to be aware of called restless mind syndrome. You've heard of restless leg syndrome, but the restless mind syndrome is where people basically, their mind is on ricochet drive all day long, and it goes into nighttime too. And I'm going to say this once and perhaps twice. We are wiring our brains for stress with constant grazing on the smartphones. I am not against technology. I am not against smartphones, but I am really into healthy boundaries. And we're not seeing that right now with our technology, which is why it's having a huge impact on sleep. So again, I'm going to ask you, do you live an unsustainable life? And I think the answer for a lot of people is yes. So what are some causes for insomnia or poor sleep? The list sounds like a who's who. Lack of exercise, shift work. Anybody actually is working late nights. Frequent urination for not just men, but for women can have that too. Chronic pain. We see a huge issue with that across the country with all kinds of things. That's why we have a problem with opioid addictions. Medications, just blood pressure medications can do this. Menopause. Sleep apnea, which is a huge problem, and not just for people who are obese. We now know that as people get older, both men and women tend to be more prone for sleep apnea. And if you don't know this, sleep apnea is basically where the muscles in the throat will relax so much that they close off the air passageway and you stop breathing. And you wake up in this snort of like gasping for breath. And a lot of times, your sleep partner, your wife or husband may be aware of this, but this is a huge problem. You may have heard of people who actually have these breathing machines at nighttime so they can actually breathe better. But this is a huge problem too, sleep apnea. They used to think it was for obese people. Now they know in sleep studies, everyone can have it. Jet lag and cell phone use, and of course, stress is the big one. So we now know that stress plays a huge factor with over half of the cases of why people don't sleep. Now take a look with some dots I'm going to connect here. The American Psychological Association says that stress in America is at epidemic levels. The World Health Organization says that burnout is at epidemic levels. The pandemic changing our lifestyle behaviors, huge problem. Women are exhausted and they're not sleeping. So this is going to have an impact on your physical health. There's no doubt about this. Uh, Again, we need to actually take some action. So, in case you end up in jeopardy, I just want to teach you a couple things about insomnia, which I thought was kind of interesting. There's lots of different takes on insomnia, and I just thought I'd give you one, but there's three different types of insomnia. The first one is called transient insomnia, and basically we're talking about where you don't sleep for a couple nights, and then you do sleep for a couple nights, and it kind of goes on and off, and it may be a week at a time, but then that's pretty much it. So transient insomnia, and if you were to go to a doctor and tell them this, they would say, you need to actually relax. They would not prescribe medications. They shouldn't prescribe medications. The next type of insomnia is called intermittent. And this is where you may go for weeks at a time where you can't sleep, and then something's resolved, usually stress, and then you can sleep. The last one is chronic insomnia, and this is where you just can't sleep at all. And a large part of this is due to stress. Again, I told you all the reasons. Stress is over half of the reasons why people can't sleep. So this is where we see the problems. Now, these people who are having chronic insomnia, they're driving cars, they're raising kids, they're in relationships with spouses, they're running countries. You can fill in the blanks here. We have a huge problem with people who are not sleeping and trying to function in the waking state and doing a horrible job with it. Falling asleep at the wheel. A lot of worksite accidents are the result of sleep problems. There's one more type of insomnia I want you to be aware of. I never heard of this until I began to look at this. And that's called rebound insomnia. And rebound insomnia is somebody who's on a medicine or a medication for insomnia. They think, I hate the side effects. I can't function like this. And after a few weeks, they go off it. And all of a sudden now they can't sleep. So they go back on it, but they can't stand the side effects. They go off it. And they call this rebound insomnia. There are some real issues with medications, and there's a time and a place for medications, but there's also options. And I want you to be aware of those options too. Okay, so some people say insomnia is I can't fall asleep. Some people say is I can't stay asleep, or I can't fall back to sleep. I want to just introduce a little bit of meditation here, and I'll tell you why. There are some experts sleep experts who say if you can't sleep, get out of the bedroom. And what happens is people who can't sleep go out of the bedroom, they come back with their devices, and then 3, 4 in the morning, they're looking at their screen devices, and that's thrown off their pineal gland and the ability to make melatonin. I say stay in the bedroom and close your eyes and try and meditate. Focus on your breathing. I think it's not a good idea to get up in the middle of the night and walk around for hours because it's really impacting the possibility that you may fall back to sleep. So the bedroom is basically should just be an area for sleep. That's the message there. So you may have heard this expression, you need 8 hours of sleep. I think we've all heard that. But the question is why? And when you see these slides, you'll see that I have one slide on brain waves and one slide of the sleep cycle. And the sleep cycle is pretty fascinating. There's actually different phases of the sleep cycle that we talk about: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. It's all about how your brain begins to calm down and the waves go from like spiking real high to very, very easy waves. But at the end of phase 4, you go into REM, and that's called rapid eye movement. We now know you need at least 3 to 4 segments of rapid eye movement to get a good night's sleep, to function in the awake state. Now, this phase 1 through REM takes about 90 minutes. And they say you need 3 to 4 of these sections or progressions to get a good night's sleep. And so this is where, if you do the math, you end up with 7, 8 hours. Maybe it's 4 segments of this, but as opposed to 3, I was kind of shaving a little bit off there. But in this case here, that's where the 8 hours comes from. Now, there are some people who claim to be light sleepers, that they only get to phase 1 or phase 2, and they never get back to REM. They kind of like go back to phase 1. Phase 1 basically is when you're kind of half asleep, half awake. So if you've heard of this whole idea about the 8 hours, that's where this comes from. In the past 50 years, they've been trying to study people while they sleep. And this is what they come up with about your brain waves going from alpha to delta, and really about how often do you get to REM? And there were some people who say that you only dream in REM, and that's the most important area to get to in the sleep cycle. I'm of that opinion too. Now, let's talk about sleep medications. I got a couple slides here about Ambien and Lunesta, and there's some guy with a butterfly in his shoulder. Okay, so if you get nothing else on this presentation, this is the most important thing I could say, although I say that about everything I talk about. I sat down for 3 hours with a sleep expert over dinner, and I was astonished at what he told me. So I don't want you to lose sleep on this, but consider this. He said the brain makes over 300 to 400 neurochemicals, neurotransmitters, epinephrine, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, melatonin. Those are just the top couple. He said, we only have 3 studied really well. Okay, I'll just make this real clear. There are 300 to 400 brain neurochemicals. They've got 3 studied very well. That to me shows we don't know how brain chemistry works. He said the ones they know real well are serotonin, dopamine, and epinephrine. He never mentioned melatonin. That to me is concerning about how the brain works if you don't have a good study or understanding about sleep. So I just want you to be aware that we do not have a good handle on brain chemistry. We do not have a good handle on all of these things, how they function with consciousness. And we're learning, but we're not there yet. So you know what he said to me? He said, before I ever prescribe a sleep medicine, I suggest they start taking chamomile tea. And I'm thinking like, wow, this is a doctor recommending tea before you go to bed. I like it because I think that we're really heavy on prescribing medicines in this country. And I don't think that we need all that. So I think there's some behaviors that we can do to try and change our lifestyle so we can get a better night's sleep. And I think perhaps drinking chamomile tea. Chamomile tea is an herbal tea that makes you want to fall asleep more quickly. Okay, so I mentioned in terms of sleep research, the glial cells, they basically act like a vacuum cleaner to clean up your brain of the amyloid tissues. Again, if you end up in jeopardy, that's the answer. You want to get rid of amyloid tissues because if you don't, those begin to cause problems with memory, with reaction time, with cognitive functions that you need in the waking hours. So there's one study I saw that says the brain basically starts eating itself if you don't get a good night's sleep. It sounds like cannibalistic stuff. Well, we don't have to go there on that. You're going to get really depressed by the time I get done with this talk. Okay, so another topic I want to share with you is a topic called sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene. If you take a look at the research about insomnia and quality sleep, you're going to come across this term called sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene says basically, how is your sleep environment? And I take a look at the 5 senses: the sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. And the first thing they say basically is there too much light in your sleep environment? Your whole bedroom should be dark. Yet if you have the night lights, which I made reference to in terms of this article in National Geographic, city lights at nighttime can affect those people living in the city. That's going to affect it. So you want to have good shades. How is the temperature in your room? The research shows if you have a cool temperature, you're going to sleep better than if you don't, because the pineal gland that makes melatonin kicks in when the temperature drops. Also, things like noise. This is a huge factor, especially if you're a light sleeper. How can we try and get a better night's sleep? And that's to minimize noise. And of course, as you're going to hear me say several times, technology does not belong in the bedroom. You're going to see in this slide presentation, there's a really graphic slide of people in bed and the screen light just is basically going into their face. But what it's really doing, it's going through their eyes into the pineal gland to stop making melatonin. So my question for you is, how is your sleep hygiene? Now, the first thing I hear people talk to me about is, oh, I want to get a new mattress. And yes, that's a consideration. So are bed sheets. And I got to tell you, given the preference, I would go with 1,000 count bed sheets. And the reason why is that you spend a third of your life sleeping. Why would you deny yourself good bedding? I've been at some people's houses where I think the thread count's like around 20 to 30. It's like sandpaper. Amanda Steele, I don't see you smiling with that line. That was my best line. I can just see your picture there. Okay, so how is your sleep hygiene? This is a question I want you to ask your clients, your participants in your wellness programs, because my guess is most of them have never even thought about this. Most people have the Wi-Fi router under the bed. They got their computer on a desk by the bed. It's a biohazard zone. That's not going to help them sleep at all. So what I typically say is that the bedroom is for one purpose and one purpose only. The bedroom, to sleep, nothing else. Okay, possibly one other thing. I'll let you figure out what that is. Amanda just smiled again. Thank you, Amanda. Okay, so if someone says to you, hey, what was that conference you went to at MESSA? You can say, well, I learned one thing about sleep, and that is that the light from the computer screens diminishes your ability to make melatonin. Melatonin, as you well know by now, is a sleep hormone. And if that sleep hormone is not being made, you are not going to sleep. Okay, it's that simple. You need to have melatonin. Screen light definitely inhibits the production of melatonin. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking like, well, what if I have this app that decreases the light on my computer screen as I go through the course of the night? Yes, there are some apps like that. And yes, they're better than not having the apps. I'm a real big fan of the concept called healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries basically are appropriate behaviors. Now, there's a whole concept called screen addictions you should be aware of. And if we have time, we'll get into that. We can definitely ask questions about that. But it turns out that that people have these habits where they're taking all of their devices to bed with them, and as a consequence, throwing off melatonin production, throwing off circadian rhythms, again, more dots to connect, and as a consequence, not getting a good night's sleep. Also there's a woman named Susan Greenfield, who's a researcher out in England who does, she's a professor of synaptic pharmacology, which I never even knew was a possibility for study, but apparently she did. And it turns out that we now know with her research that people are wiring their brains for stress. I'll say it again. They're wiring their brains for stress. And the reason why is because when you're constantly surfing the internet, going through your TikTok files or your emails and stuff, you're rewiring your brain to always be on guard. One of the symptoms of PTSD is called hypervigilance. Well, I wouldn't call people who are always looking at their devices hypervigilant, but I would say that they're vigilant. And that means your eyes are on guard for new sensory stimulus. And so people, as a consequence of checking their emails, checking their texts, checking their social media, are always on guard for what's going on there. As a consequence, you're wiring your brain for stress. And if you're doing this and then you try and go to bed at night, your brain is jacked up where you can't unwind, you can't unplug, you can't calm down. Now, we now know through mindfulness meditation that you can rewire your brain for relaxation. And so healthy boundaries are so essential to say, you know what, at 8 o'clock, I'm turning off the technology and I'm just going to try and meditate or maybe read a book or what the case might be there. But if you're looking at screen devices clear up until when your head hits the pillow, you're still engaged in the stress response. Does that make sense? Amanda, does that make sense to you? I hate to keep picking on you, but you're the only people I can see there. So thank you for being my audience. Okay, so one concept I want you to share with your employees is, are you wiring your brain for stress? Again, I'm going to tell you technology is not bad, but we need to have healthy boundaries with it. We need to have appropriate behaviors with it. And the Institute of Sleep says technology does not belong in the bedroom. You leave it out there. I know what you're thinking. Some people say, well, I use my cell phone for my alarm clock. Okay, here's what I would do a behavior change. Go back to an analog clock. You don't need the cell phone under your pillow with all the vibrations that it's kicking out to wake you up at a certain time. And again, if the question is, are you addicted to your device? If the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is check your cell phone, and the last thing you do before you hit the pillow is check your cell phone for text messages or social media, yes, we have a problem with addictions. Okay. I think a really cute cartoon here I have. It says, I am not your device. You are my device. By the way, I have a slide here with Anderson Cooper, who did a section on 60 Minutes called Brain Hacking. It sounds like a mixed message here, but when you get a chance, Google that 60-second it's like section of brain hacking, and it's about 20 minutes long. I want you to see how the companies who make social media, who make everything from eBay to Amazon, keep you addicted to the technology, where it's really hard to put that down and go to sleep. When you see that, you're going to have a whole different thought about the world. So one of the suggestions we give, and I'm going to give you a lot of suggestions here in a minute, is to maintain a media curfew. Maintain a media curfew, which means at 8:30, turn off the screen devices. The research shows you need at least about 2 hours to start making melatonin before you go to bed. Okay. So if the devices are shedding light into your brain here, and then you hit the pillow, you've done nothing to make melatonin, which means you're not going to sleep for at least 2 more hours. So I got a picture here. I just got to tell you, because when you see this, I hope you laugh, but there's a picture of 2 different guys. One guy with a cell phone and duct tape to his head so he can always be in a cell phone. I typically say this: if you see any guy with duct tape to his head with a cell phone, you should run in the opposite direction. Okay. By the way, I want to applaud women. I found no women of pictures of women with cell phones to their head. I found at least 40 pictures of guys. So that's why women is the superior gender to our species. Just FYI on that. So I got a couple of slides here called The Invasion of Technology in the Bedroom. The Institute of Sleep in America says we have a huge problem, and they call this the invasion of technology in the bedroom. And I got a couple of graphic pictures here. You can see that if you decide you want to use this for your presentations. By the way, Welcoa has this same slide set, although I've embellished it some, if you want to actually access that as well. But I would encourage you to consider a slide presentation to your population here. If you get nothing else out of this presentation, it's this, and this is really important. I know I've said this 14 times already, but one more. Turn off the Wi-Fi router before you go to bed, okay? Put your Wi-Fi router on a power strip and turn it off before you go to bed. Now, a lot of people kind of do like a pre-sleep routine where they turn off the lights, they put the dog out to pee, they close the front door, they water the plants, whatever the case might be there, and then they go to bed. Add to that list, turn off the Wi-Fi router, and here's why. The Wi-Fi router emits a low-frequency microwave that affects your pineal gland to stop making melatonin. So even if you're not looking at your device, if your Wi-Fi router is on in your house, you are having your melatonin production compromised. You're going to see on a slide here, it's called Resonance, Beings of Frequency. It's a reminder to go watch another documentary, but it's a documentary. If you Google that, you'll see that on YouTube. It's a free hour-long movie. I know it's a mixed message saying go to Google, but go for the concept. But there's an hour-long movie about why these low-frequency vibrations are having an effect on our sleep. And I have 2 more slides here. One says direct suppressive effects of weak magnetic fields on melatonin synthesis. And then this one says 17 studies show that ELFs, that stands for extremely low frequency vibrations, reduces melatonin. You should know that when you hear the terms reduce melatonin, we got problems. We're not getting a good night's sleep. And so the Wi-Fi router, I have people say to me, you mean I got the Wi-Fi router in my bedroom, should I move it? And I'm like, yes, I would move it out of the bedroom, all technology out of the bedroom. And then I would put the Wi-Fi router on a power strip, because it can be cumbersome to turn on and off, but a power strip makes it easy. You're not going to use your technology while you're sleeping anyway, so you don't need the Wi-Fi router on. But if this is also compromising your melatonin production, we need it off. I've had one person who came up to me and said, actually I've had several, but one person comes to mind. He was in Ireland, because they got this problem of no sleep in Ireland too, by the way. And he said to me, since I've done what you said about turning the Wi-Fi router off at nighttime, I sleep much better. I'm like, hallelujah. Great. We need that. Okay. So now I have a question here. Says some people are asking me, should I take melatonin as a supplement? And my answer is no. See your doctor, of course, but a lot of doctors aren't aware of this. They're going to probably prescribe a sleep medicine. But melatonin is a natural forming substance that you make. But if you take it orally, you're sending a message to your brain to say, we got enough, stop making it. And you're going to throw off your brain chemistry. Okay, so yeah, you might think the answer is to take melatonin if you're not making it. The answer is no. Do not mess up your brain. Your brain is very delicate. We don't need to have more problems there. But I will tell you this, and I get asked this quite a bit. What are some other possibilities? And I would recommend, and I don't know Michigan very well, but because I'm out here in Colorado, but I would tell you that you might want to consider going to see an acupuncturist. Okay, acupuncture, there's two kinds of acupuncture. There is classical and there is traditional. You may have heard of traditional Chinese medicine. I want to go classical. Classical is an older form of acupuncture, but I talk to my acupuncturist about this all the time, and she said, I work so much with insomnia because so much of insomnia is related to stress, and so much of acupuncture, she says, is dealing with people who've got stress. So before you start taking medicines, consider some other options. And in today's day, we call this integrative medicine, but consider maybe some other options before you start taking pharmaceuticals, because that to me is a last resort. And again, I'm going to tell you, the person who I spoke to said clearly that should be a last resort. Okay, so one thing we're going to get across in case you end up on Jeopardy, or in case Rhonda has a quiz on this, which she just might, what are some common sleep robbers? Okay, I want you to understand the term sleep robbers because it's things that steal your sleep away from you. And the list, it contains things which I'm sure you're well aware of, but light, too much light in the room, sleep robber. Noise, sleep robber. Room temperature, too high, sleep robber. Television, computers, smartphones, definitely sleep robbers. Move the TV out of the bedroom too. I know what you're thinking. Like my husband's wife's never going to talk to me again. Yes, but if you're not sleeping, this is something to take in consideration. A sleep partner. Now, I got to tell you, I went to a sleep conference and I was amazed to hear this. It's a term called a sleep divorce. Now, it doesn't mean that you divorce. It just means that when you're sleeping, you're not sleeping together in the same bedroom. If you have the means to, and the luxury to have different bedrooms. But what I discovered is that as couples get older, and sleep apnea becomes a problem, and God knows what else, I suppose people put on weight, restless leg syndrome, noises when they sleep, all of a sudden now couples aren't sleeping very well. And so one couple, the wife usually says, I'm going to go sleep in the other room. I'm going to go sleep in the guest room. And I found out that, wait you hear this, 40% of married couples are sleeping under the auspices of a sleep divorce. That's pretty high. Now, if you ask your audience, have you ever heard of a sleep divorce? They'll probably say no. My guess is most couples aren't going to admit this because they're thinking like, no, I sleep with my wife or my husband. Why wouldn't I? But in confidential questionnaires, the numbers are much higher. And I got to tell you, I would support this because if you're not getting a good night's sleep, you're most likely going to have marriage problems in the waking hours. I'm not a marriage counselor. Amanda, I just want you to know I'm not a marriage counselor, but it makes common sense. Okay. So, and then of course, pets. I know what some of you are thinking, like, I want my little tabby in the bedroom, or I want my dog in the bedroom. They're not the same sleep patterns or circadian rhythms we are. You think they would be, but they're not. And I can tell you right now, a lot of pets dominate the bed. They take it over. I had a dog one time that I had a king size bed before I got married. This dog took over the whole thing. It was like all over the place. I'm like, and I'm a sound sleeper. I'm like, what's going on here? So yes, I love pets. I'm the first to admit I love my dog, but there's a place for a dog outside the bedroom. And if you're not getting a good night's sleep, that's the caveat. If you're not getting a good night's sleep, and this is a sleep robber, we need to make some behavioral changes. Okay, so let's go through. I mentioned spiritual well-being here, and I just got to tell you that there's all kinds of research to show that people who don't dream tend to be more troubled souls. The dreaming seems to be where we kind of work out our problems. And if there is a soul connection to our health and well-being, which at some level there is, dreaming is very important. So if we're not sleeping, very likely we're not dreaming, and that is going to be a consequence too. Now, a lot of people say, I don't remember my dreams. We now know everyone dreams if they sleep. That's the caveat. You got to get to REM. So here I have like 12 tips for good quality sleep. And I apologize for speaking really fast here. I'm trying to make sure I get all my slides done. I want to have time for questions. I know we're already off schedule here, but when you see this PDF, feel free to use this for your presentations. Feel free to use if you do some webinars yourself. Hopefully you have better luck than I'm having. And I apologize, but thanks for going with the flow. And let's see if I can find somebody else. Karen Grosvenor or Lori LaRue. Hi there. Margaret. Hey, Jim. I know you. Okay, so here's some tips. Number one tip, honor your, oh, hey, Rhonda. Honor your circadian rhythms, okay? Your body works on a 24, 25-hour clock. You need to honor that, and which means getting out in nature is part of that too, but getting a good night's sleep. And what they say for this is go to bed every night the same time, okay? So it shouldn't be like 9 o'clock one night and 10 o'clock the next night and midnight the next night. For circadian rhythms, you need to go to bed the same time every time, even on weekends, minimize news and social media. Boy, that's one thing you'll find out from the APA study is like, do not listen to the news on a regular basis. Create an ideal sleep ambience. We talked about that. By the way, I'm really big into down pillows. I'm big into down comforters, and I already mentioned 1,000 thread count sheets. Get out and exercise. We talk about the idea how important this is, but you want to flush out the stress hormones. Caffeine is a huge inhibitor to a good night's sleep. It basically is going to increase serotonin levels. We want to decrease serotonin levels. So it takes you 8 hours to metabolize 1 cup of coffee. If you're having several cups of coffee or energy drinks or tea or chocolate all throughout the day, you're telling your body, the hell with circadian rhythms. I'm on my own clock here. And that's going to come back and bite you in the butt. Learn to meditate. I'm a real big fan of meditation. And, we have this expression called monkey mind over in the Indian culture. Except for that, we don't have monkeys over here, but we do have squirrels. And all I'm going to say is wait till you see the picture of the squirrels I got for you. Okay, so meditation, mindfulness, very, very important. We now know that people who meditate, even 5 minutes a day, tend to sleep better. So if all you can do is just sit quietly, unplug from all the social distractions, close your eyes, focus on your breathing, for 5 minutes, you are going to head in the direction of rewiring your brain for better sleep, okay? So I know that we've talked about mindfulness before. I know that Rhonda's mentioned this. It's so that important to do. So how we can weave that in there. And by the way, if you're having problems sleeping, one thing we suggest is to focus on diaphragmatic breathing. Just lie in your bed, head in the pillow, and do some diaphragmatic breathing, because this is how you breathe when you sleep. Okay. You don't care how you look. You don't care if your chest is bigger than your stomach. This is how you sleep. So diaphragmatic breathing is a great way to try and ease into that. Number 6 tip, move the TV out of the bedroom. Number 7, media curfew. I would say stop using your cell phones after 8:30, possibly 8. By the way, you're going to see a slide here that says cell phone usage linked to lower sperm count. They looked at guys at the Cleveland Clinic who wore their cell phones on their hips, and they noticed that they had a dramatically lower sperm count. Now, I'm thinking to myself, if that's doing that below the hips, what's it doing above the hips? Ladies, cell phones do not belong in your bra, not by any stretch of the imagination, okay? You take a look at that. Again, cell phones are not bad, but they do not belong on the body. One thing I have here is avoid or minimize alcohol and nicotine, because this also impedes the melatonin process. Again, the idea of clearing your late night mind. One thing we see, you probably heard about this idea, is midnight snacks. I'm going to get a midnight snack. Most midnight snacks are carbohydrates. And what did I tell you about carbohydrates? Shoots up serotonin levels. We want to decrease serotonin levels. So a midnight snack should not be carbohydrates. And that would be sugars especially, okay? FYI on that. There's some research that says that you should not have naps in the daytime. I've also seen research that says naps in the daytime are great. I'm going to say, let you decide. Okay, if you really feel you're tired, take a 5-minute nap. Okay. But what we now know is that people who sleep for an hour in the daytime throw off the circadian rhythms for sleeping at nighttime. So I typically say, do what works best for you. Um, and then last but not least, keep your bedroom for sleeping. It should not be where you check your social media, watch TV, do Amazon shopping or eBay or Etsy or all that kind of stuff. The technology does not belong in the bedroom and does not belong in the bed. That's a good, healthy habit to have a healthy boundary. Okay, so Rhonda, I got more information, but we'll stop there right now. But let's see if we take some time for questions. And again, I apologize to everybody. I don't know why my slides wouldn't show, but you're going to get a PDF once I get it to Rhonda, and she is going to make sure you have it available, and you can see all the good slides that you missed, and feel free to embellish any way you want. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. That was great. Are there any questions? I know a question came up in the chat room. Should I take melatonin? And I believe you addressed that.
Yeah, let me just repeat that and why. Yeah. Okay. First of all, always check with your healthcare provider, because some people don't have primary care physicians. Some people have acupuncturists or naturopathists or such. But definitely check with somebody. Just don't do it on your own. But the reason why they say don't take it unsupervised is that if you take melatonin on your own, you're now telling your pineal gland, stop making it. We don't need it anymore. If you tell your brain that, then you're going to throw off your brain chemistry. And brain chemistry is so delicate, ever so delicate. Like I said, they only have 3 neuropeptides down really well. There's another 399 they don't have down real well because they don't even know about them all, probably. So the last thing you want to do is mess with your brain chemistry. We want to honor that. So again, check with your healthcare provider. My thought is it's always best to do it yourself on your own.
I agree. I say the same thing in my sleep sessions. I must have learned that from you because I was telling the folks here, he's saying the same stuff I say, or perhaps I'm saying the same stuff you say. So good information. Wait on the melatonin. Make sure the room is dark. Make sure the room is cool. Get the digital devices out of the room. If you're still not sleeping, perhaps turn off the Wi-Fi. If you're
turn that off anyway. Don't say perhaps. Turn that off first. That should be the top 10 list.
Turn it off. Right. If you're still not sleeping, perhaps add exercise early in the day. And if it's still not working, perhaps looking at what you're eating. Those are all the tips I heard you say. Any other questions? This was awesome information. And I want to remind everyone, we have Dr. Seaward's book, Getting a Good Night's Sleep. And we have definitely a few available for our conference participants. So if you're interested in that book, say you want to do a campaign for your colleagues, you notice that they're falling asleep during meetings, or their heads are on their desk longer than usual, and you want to do a campaign about sleep, we can provide that book for you and help you with that. You know, I always say, if you don't get good sleep at night, you won't move well during the day. That is my motto. So sleep is probably more important than exercise, because if you're not sleeping, you don't exercise well. Would you agree, Dr. Seaward?
Yes, exercise is very, very important. And it's part of the necessary circadian rhythms balance. The body requires good stress, which is what exercise is. And really what it does is it flushes out the stress hormones. Aside from things like losing weight and everything else, the heart health, I'm all for that. But lately, what I really want to say is that we need to have people flush out the cortisol, the vasopressin, the aldosterone, the epinephrine, norepinephrine, because if you don't, you've got this chemical cocktail, this stress chemical cocktail sloshing through your body, wreaking havoc. And this should be on national headline news. Cortisol, the stress hormone, when it gets done with all of its responsibilities for increasing blood sugar levels and lipids in your blood for energy, we don't know why, but it destroys white blood cells. So that's the connection between stress and disease. There's several, but that's one of them. And so exercise keeps your body in balance, aside from the fact that it's also going to contribute to really good brain chemistry and allow you to sleep better too. I can tell you, I worked with Olympic athletes, and the one thing that they did not skimp on was 8 hours of sleep, because if they found out if they skimped on sleep, their performance in the daytime, and we're talking Olympic athletes here, dropped dramatically. So exercise is essential. And I know what you're thinking. I don't got time to do all this stuff. This like wellness is like a 24-hour job. Not necessarily. Just going out for a morning walk is important. If we can, I mean, if you can do that, don't deny yourself the stuff that is essential for your health and well-being. It is an investment in your health and well-being. And I got to tell you, I just turned 64, and I start getting things from AARP. I'm now talking about Medicaid. I'm like, I'm not that old. I saw a meme that says, man, all these people talking about getting old. I'm like, oh yeah. Okay, I got a little joke for you. I saw a cartoon. I don't know if I can find it for you, but it's pretty funny. It says, do you remember when you got out of bed without making sound effects? Oh my God.
Too funny. Thank you so much, Brian.